time when I liked two guys. And I remember one of them, I read his old blog, and he had a post about an ex where he referred to her as a narcissistic and frigid, and then reflected on how he knows he's calling her those things because he's in a lot of pain, and pain of rejection and wanting to connect, but mad that she gave up on them. And so anyway, I saw that blog, and my initial reaction to those insults was a ton of fear. And that's because I thought, well, that's what he'll call me, or that's the level of below the belt he'll go. And so there was a kind of, there was like a ready to fight kind of, well, if he goes there, then I'll go here. And this is just all very fast. It's not like a conscious, it's like a flicker, reactive thought. But paradoxically, I actually, even though I initially had that flicker of fear, I actually came to find that was a more trustworthy admission. Like his willingness to admit that he had those kinds of insults and kind of reflect on why he felt that way and where he was coming from, very strangely and paradoxically made me trust him, because it's like I knew where he'd go. It's like there wouldn't be the surprise of the attack. It was like I knew kind of, okay, that's the angle he goes, well, okay. And there was this level of actually trusting when I saw that mask slip of seeing an ugly side of someone. But then also I wouldn't say it's an ugly side, because it's just more truthful. It's just more of the dimension of someone. Because to me, when I saw that, I also saw myself, because I have also been that person that is in pain and insults people. And then I also just saw when he was able to step outside that self and reflect on how, well, I'm only doing this because I'm in pain. I mean, there was something very admirable about how there's owning up to him, everything about it. So it's just all overall more honesty. And honesty inspires trust, even if the honesty gets ugly. And it's so interesting because I wouldn't have thought that if somebody just said that. Like, if I were watching a video right now of someone saying that you will have more trust in someone when you see them write insults about exes, I would say, sorry, no, I wouldn't. But weirdly, very strangely, I had more trust with that, of knowing how ugly it could get, knowing what his shadow was, and the fact that he owned it. Had way more trust with that than with somebody who's always like maybe claiming to be Mr. Nice Guy or even Mr. Clever Guy. Because often I notice the biggest masks we have for control are being the good guy and wanting that idealized self, like thinking that you are always the good, virtuous person, and the other one is always being the smartest person. And both of those are basically an avoidance of shame, humiliation, and being a fool. And what does that mean? It means those are all masks to feel a false sense of control, but that are actually not inviting the deep intimacy that an admission of, yeah, I was vengeful and I was upset and I was petty. Like, that's the human honesty, saying that kind of thing. But some people don't ever want to be seen as the villain or the bad person, so they're just not even going to have a willingness to admit that they even had vengeful, mean-spirited thoughts, because they think that by saying that, they're going to lose connection. And yes, there is a fear when there's a fear when you see somebody has acted that way. There's a fear, but there's also a weird relief, and it happens fast. Like I said, my initial reaction was like fear, but then my overall reaction was trust, which is strange. So if I'm always around someone that's nice, and that not just that they're nice, but they also think they think of themselves as nice. That's actually worse. So somebody that's nice and thinks of themselves and identifies solely with the aspect of them that is kind, nice, empathic, generous, and just only thinks that's all they are. And so there's a lack of honesty there that opens up it doesn't open up anything. It actually closes up a level of deepening intimacy, because if we cannot own our shadow and show our dimension and be willing to be humiliated, ashamed, and be the fool, then we are not going to be truly vulnerable, and then we're not going to have deep intimacy. It's just surface level. And you see people with of course, all of humanity has an extreme resistance to being humiliated, to being a fool, to being in shame. Like, we all avoid that. But there are people that avoid that to the degree of absurdity, where they actually they would rather humiliate you than be humiliated themselves, because they just have such a level of fear toward it. And they don't realize that actually letting themselves have that, be vulnerable, admit that they're vengeful, takers, petulant, foolish, dumb, any kind of whatever their perceived weakness is, because we all have certain things that we view we can never be seen as. It's unacceptable to be seen as X, right? So interestingly, what I realized from that is wow, I actually have more trust with this guy in knowing how he insulted his ex and how he felt about that than I do with this other guy who is just always like wants to view himself as the good guy, the smart guy, the perfect guy that will always deflect. Like, if that self-image is ever threatened, he will just completely deflect and say that that's my own idea of him, instead of just being able to have that vulnerability and that honesty, which actually would resolve and make everything a little bit deeper. And I wouldn't expect that to be the case, but it is. And I definitely have to admit that part of it is the fact that guy, he made those insults, but he was able to step aside and say, I'm making these insults from my lower self, and I know it's because I'm feeling pain and the fear of disconnection and rejection. So that his additional analysis of his own behavior is also what really established trust, because it showed self-awareness. So it's not just that he insulted, it's that he insulted and was able to admit the true hardcore wounding behind that. Because whenever there's that anger, there's also often grief, they say, right? And so I just think that this comes at the very core of what it means to be in love and in intimate. It's actually a willingness to show that you're a fool and to show that level of being humiliated, because actually those things bring you to surrender to all of you, and then you have somebody else witnessing it, and so there's a freeing feeling. It's not so much like, oh, I always have to have this mask on that's always clever, always kind, always beautiful, always perfect. No, you don't have to have that. And actually that's the freedom in it. And I have a lot of analysis of kind of when people deflect, like for instance, like Amber Heard. And see, what she doesn't realize is if she just owned up to that part, she would actually get the connection and deeper intimacy that she wants. But see, she just can't. And that's why that's the blindness and the arrogance of those kinds of people that are so avoiding the humiliation and shame, and that their very liberation is to actually let that be seen and to realize they actually get deeper love. Because once you realize that, you won't be able to go back, and then you're actually freed from the prison of thinking that exposure or thinking that humiliation will undo, like there's no longer that fear of it to the point where you have to live in lies, because living in truth is the ultimate spiritual truth, because it's what frees you. And that means being in the ugliness of yourself and owning it, and it means being able to let another person see your ugliness and actually trusting that they're not going to hate you after. And if they do hate you after, it's because they haven't been able to confront that part of themselves that they hate, and so they can't, that's what's also a part of this. Part of why I was able to accept that guy had those vengeful remarks is I saw myself in him and thought, yeah, I do that when I'm hurt, and I know that and I like seeing somebody just admit what it is and own it. And so you have to be willing to admit, I've been the bad guy, I see the bad guy in you, and we all actually see and love the good and bad in each other, and that's really not, what a relief, what a freedom to have that dimension. Now, it doesn't mean that we just make a demand out of it, like somebody's got to love me for my malice. No, somebody's going to love you for the totality, though, the entirety, the fact that you have this wonderful, empathic, good, generous, clever side. Oh, but then that you're not just some perfect mannequin, but you're also somebody that can show when you're being vengeful and when you're being mean-spirited, and being able to just have that entirety and love that about yourself, and then you love it in others, and then it really is the essential truth, because people who are living in the lies and telling themselves that they're a good person, they're actually they're chained up in the fear of exposure, and they're chained up in needing external people that validate their idealized image, and they're not going to break the cycle by doing that. Like, they're just going to keep getting in repeated patterns where they get confronted again with the truth of who they are. They refuse to see it, and then they're just going to keep going, and ultimately being in that mix of elation and misery, because that's what lies do. It's just kind of a weird reactive cycle where you're avoiding yourself. So anyway, I hope that this was informative, because for me it was really revelatory, really helped me see, I actually trust somebody for showing that ugly side of themselves more than somebody who is always having to think of themselves as the good guy, as the clever guy, as the perfect guy who's always right. And it's not just about showing your ugly side. It's not just about that, but it's all about that willingness to be a fool, to be humiliated or shamed, and that can mean any matter of things, because some people, that wound is showing how selfish they are. Some people, that wound is actually showing nice kindness. So we all have things that we think, if that is revealed, we're vulnerable and we're annihilated. So it's not just the virtue mask is just a common one, and the clever mask are a common one. That's why I referred to them. So anyway, have a willingness to be humiliated, and then surrender to that humiliation, that shame, and you'll realize that actually that's freeing. And it's sometimes easier said than done, because even though I say that, am I willing to be humiliated? No, I'm pretty scared, but I've had a lot of experiences of being humiliated, and I did notice that it's actually not the end that you think it is, and that you actually do have deeper relationships with the people who saw you humiliated than you do with anyone else in your life. Because the people that you're just repeating slogans to like a mannequin, or the people that are attached to your idea of the clever girl, the good girl, whatever it might be, those are shallow. Those are the shallow end of the pool. And so free yourself today. There's a cognitive dissonance too. It's a willingness to go into the cognitive dissonance that you are not going to be who you think you are. People are not going to react how you think you are. None of that is actually controllable. Just realize you can actually have the most deep connection with people who do see your ugliness with your beauty.